Hey folks, Dennis here with Las Vegas Worm Farm and the Living Soul community. It's time for our worm topic of the week. This week, what we're going to be diving into is the end of the summer and getting ready for the fall. Yes, I understand. If you're in the Southwest, where I am right down here in Vegas or Phoenix in that area, you're probably like, hey, you can't talk about fall when it's still 108 degrees outside. You're right. But our growing calendar also says that we should be starting seeds now. So, time to get ready. So, let's kind of talk about this. After a summer like this, or some of us are still in it, right? It's probably looking worn out. They're probably busted, brown. The soil's drying out faster than ever, right? And in some cases, your beds or your gardens are probably pretty bare. The soil is not covered up. There's no moisture retention, nothing. But you have roots and compost and mulch and living biology. We're protecting, right, the soil, and this gives the soil a better chance to kind of recover and support next season's crops, which is what this video is going to be about. By the end of this video, you'll know how to clean up your summer crops, how to protect your soil, adjust your watering, and prepare your beds so that you can have a successful fall garden planting season, right? And the way we're going to do that is we're going to cover how to kind of remove your crops and get rid of them, maybe even reuse some of those crops. We're going to talk about watering. We're also going to talk about compost, refreshing your beds with maybe some castings or some extract, basically biology, how we can support some of that soil biology, and then feeding the soil for long term so that, we don't have to start over every season, or what feels like starting over every season, right? Because I know some of us, when we're just getting started, it can feel like, oh my God, I got to do all of these things that I did 3 or 4 months ago all over again. And it shouldn't feel that way most of the time. There's still work to be done when we're doing gardening. So, but for the majority of it, it doesn't have to be that way. So let's jump right into it. First thing, summer crop out, fall crop in, right? So how do we do that? There's a lot of different ways to kind of get rid of all of those plants. And I think the majority of people, what they do, and even what I did, was I just grab the plant and I just yank it out and pull it out. We're done with it. It's over. It goes into the trash, right? And I just go through the entire bed and I'm just like whoop, 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 popping everything out and then throwing it away. Doesn't matter if it's sick, dead, dying, still green. If I need to make space for the fall stuff, it's all coming out, right? That is one approach, right? And we can open up space for those new plants. One thing to remember is that from the time that we clean the beds until the time that we plant the new stuff, there's a period of time there where your bed might be empty. And if you know anything about the things that we talk about, an empty bed is a bad bed, right? That's not a good thing. It's just like an open wound. Like an open wound is not a good wound. You're susceptible to a lot of things, and we don't want that. So let's kind of talk about what I do. First of all, I leave the plants in there as long as I can. And if I absolutely have to take out my dead and dying and diseased plants, right, what I'm going to do with those is I'm going to chop them off at the base, just at the base. I'm going to take the top parts and we're going to reuse those, right? So chop them off at the base, and we're going to leave the roots and everything in the soil. The reason we do that, right, is to feed the biology and keep the soil going and churning, right? If we just yank that plant out, the first thing that we do is we create a wound in the soil, right? We open the soil up, kind of like my thumb. I don't know if y'all can see that. I cut myself, so I had to put a Band-Aid on it, right? Because I opened everything up, and then it was exposed to the elements, and I don't want to get, infected and like all the other bad stuff, right? Get pus and everything else growing out of it. Well, if we do that to the soil and we just yank out plants, we have an open wound there, and we need to cover that up, right? And we need to keep it protected. So cut the plant off at the base. That is the best thing that you do. This protects the roots in the soil for a period of time until the microbes get to it, and then they'll start breaking it down. So it turns into a food source. Also, it helps retain moisture. You didn't disturb that soil, right? You didn't bring the subsoil up, the soil underneath, right? You didn't bring that up to the surface when you rip the plant out. So you're keeping everything intact the way it is. Just leave it there. It'll be okay. And that is a good thing. But you've made space for a space to plant a new plant, right? Yes, I understand that some of your plants are probably not going to have or are going to have very thick stems, right? Like your sunflowers, they can get, 2, 3 inches across sometimes. And maybe those you're going to have to, kind of cut around it, you know, and maybe you have to rip it out because you don't have enough space, right? But those are things that we can work around. Those are once in a while instances. That's not something that we should be doing on a regular basis, if that makes sense. So, work around the beds and do it section by section. The closer you can get to, the planting, the better, the better it is. So if you know that you're going to start, your brassicas right now, right? Your cabbages, broccolis, kales, Brussels sprouts. Kale is not a brassica, I don't believe. Maybe it is. But if you're going to start those, then start with a bed, right? Start with a section of the bed, clear that bed out, and then you can plant those and do it section by section. The reason I say this and the reason I say is leave things in the bed as long as possible is because we want to have a nice handover between summer and fall. Stick with me here. Have you guys ever worked shift work where, one crew comes in before you or after you and takes over what you're doing? If you have, it is nice when they leave things in place so you can just jump right in and continue on working, right? That's the best case scenario. You leave everything the way it is so the next person can just hop in and continue doing what they're supposed to do, which is working, right? The soil works the same way. We want to leave things the way they are as much as possible so they keep working. The worst thing we can do is, like, let's say our shift is about to change and the person before us comes over and changes everything. They move the keyboard, they move the desk, they move the chair, they move the machine, they move, your pens, papers, they move everything around. And then when you get there, you're like, hey, where's all my stuff? It wasn't like this before. Where's the paper? Where's my keyboard? Why did the desk move? Why am I facing the window? I want to face the wall. It's hot right here, right? Your plants are the same way. If we disturb the soil and we move everything around and we change things up, it's like a brand new shift coming into work and they're having to start all over. Your soil's, why would you do that? Why? That's not fun. Now, I understand if you don't like the person that's taken over for you, right? Or maybe they don't like you and they mess everything up on purpose because they don't like you, right? Or you don't like them. Okay. But like the majority of the time, we like the people we work with, right? And we don't want to mess it up for them. We want to have a scene. Hey, man, I already got everything squared away for you. It's taken care of. This is over here. This is over there. All you got to do is just do this, 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 and you should be squared away for the rest of the shift, right? That's what we want. We want to do the same thing for the soil. So we're going to keep everything in place as much as possible. Don't change a lot of things, right? Just cut the things out that need to be out and then plant your stuff as necessary. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the second thing is, what do we do with all those plants that we just cut up, right? There's a couple of things that we can do, or a couple of ways that we can go about it. We want to reuse the plants that are still alive. We want to reuse the plants for a good purpose, right? We don't just want to throw them away. That is nutrients and things that we can add back into the soil, right? And that's what Mother Nature does naturally. When plants die, they just fall over, die, and then it goes back into the soil, right? So we want to do the same thing. Now, if you've got a diseased plant that has a disease, right, or it's covered in pests, maybe those you want to process separately, right? So we're going to talk about a couple of different ways that you can kind of utilize these plants. If they're healthy, good to go, they're just dead and dying, there's nothing wrong with them, right? Then we can just chop and drop. That's very simple. We just cut them down, lay them in place, and leave them there. Now, it comes with pros and cons, right? Because like if you got a lot, it's going to cover a lot of area, and maybe you can't grow stuff through that. Understand that. I have that problem too sometimes, right? My cosmos take over, and I got all this waste. I can't just lay it on top. Now, if it's my sweet potato vines, I'll just lay it on top. Not a big deal. They'll decompose. But run it through a wood chipper, right? That works. And then just put the wood chips back into the bed, or the chipper, whatever comes out of the chipper, put it back into the bed. You can also just take your shears, and while you're cutting them, just cut it up into small, inch, 2-inch, maybe even 3-inch pieces, and just leave it in the bed. That's fine too, right? Leaves are going to break down very quickly. The stems are going to stick around for a little while, but like all of that is food, carbon source, sometimes nitrogen for your plants that can go right back into the soil, right? The microbes will break these things down and turn them into nutrients for your plants at some point, probably the next season. Now, that's for good and healthy plants. Now, if we've got dead, dying plants, then we really want to treat those. So if you are composting, whether you're doing vermicompost or a thermophilic compost, or you're doing static composting and you're actually letting it sit for 12 to 18 months, if you are doing those processes, then you can add those diseased or dead or pest riddled plants to that system, and that system will naturally kill it, right? The thermophilic composting process will kill all of the disease and pathogens. The static pile will get rid of all of those over a longer period of time, and worms will actually take care of that entire process for you, right? Maybe not the pests. I take it back. I would not do that with pest riddled, because vermicomposting, they're not going to eat the larvae or the pest eggs or anything like that. So maybe not. Maybe don't put that stuff into a vermicomposting bin, but you can definitely put those into a static pile, or you can put them into a thermophilic pile. Otherwise, I would get rid of those, as in like probably put them in the recycling bin or send them to a composting facility and let them deal with it, right? And take care of that. So that's the best way to do it. It's kind of like, it was the plant's trash, but it's going to turn into food for us later. The best way I can do it is just, we're recycling. That's what we're doing, right? We don't want to get rid of what we can use again. That also saves us on compost and other things that we have to keep adding to the bed because it costs money. Just use the stuff that you have. All right, the next thing we kind of want to look like, or before we jump into that, if you guys like this type of content, do me a favor, give it a like, give it a share, drop a comment down below, and that means that it will go out to other people who like this type of content too. All right, let's get back to it. Now, the third thing that we're going to talk about is adjusting the water, right? Temperatures are going to if you're here in Vegas, temperatures ain't changing yet. We're not getting there, but humidity has changed. So let's talk about that. Temperatures will eventually change, and as those temperatures change, we need to adjust the watering, right? So it was hot, water evaporates very quickly. It's going to cool off. The evaporation is going to be a lot less. So we need to lower the amount of water that we're adding to the beds. That means use your finger, go out there and test it, right? Do the finger method. You don't need any special tools. You don't need a meter or whatever else that you think you need to be able to test the soil. Just stick your finger out there. If it comes out dirty, it's moist. If it comes out clean, you need more water, right? We're going down to the second knuckle. Now you've got 10 different digits that you can use as a tool. You'll never run out of them, hopefully. That's how you check your soil and check the moisture. You're going to have to adjust it. Now, if you're in Vegas, right, and we hit the monsoon season, or you're in the desert Southwest, or if you have a monsoon season, you're going to have to adjust your watering as well. Because there's so much humidity in the air, the water is not going to evaporate as quickly either. So you need to dial back on the watering. And again, the best way to judge this is by sticking your finger in the soil and doing a moisture test. If it's moist, you're good to go. If it's dry, it's not okay. All right. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. The watering is probably the quickest way that you're going to fail from summer into fall, because if you don't adjust your watering, you're going to flood your plants and you're going to cause anaerobic conditions, and they are going to die. So you have to adjust the watering. Doesn't matter how good you are at soil preparation and keeping everything ready. If you go into the next season and you don't adjust your watering, and you're still watering 10 times a day because it was 110 degrees and it's now fall and it's 80 degrees or 90 degrees and you're still watering 10 times, you're going to kill your plants, right? The way that I kind of relate to this, or people about this, my analogy is, think about somebody that you care about, right? They're going to come up to you and hand you a glass of water and say, hey, here you go. And you're probably going to say, oh, thank you. That was kind of you, right? And you're going to drink that glass of water. A few hours later, they're going to come up to you again and offer you a glass of water. And you're going to be like, oh, thoughtful. I just finished my last one. I'll drink this one. But you're not going to finish that one because you just had a glass of water. A few hours later, they're going to come back and be like, hey, I have another glass of water for you. And at this point, you're going to look at them and be like, what are you doing? Like, I already had two. I'm not even done with this one. Now you can bring me another one. And they just look at it and you say, you're welcome, and walk away. A few hours later, after dinner, they're going to bring you another glass of water and say, here you go. And you're going to be like, I don't want the water. It's too much. Stop handing me water. And then think about this. They're going to do this the next day and the day after and the day after. At some point, you're going to get sick and tired of all of this water. That's your plants. If you don't adjust your watering, they're going to get sick and tired of it. And unfortunately, they can't tell you about it. So they're just going to die. That's the way that I kind of like to relate to adjusting your watering, right? Like, don't force feed your plants water. If they don't want it, they don't want it. So don't give it to them. All right, enough on that topic. The next one is prepare your soil. Prep the soil, right? And the way I like to do this is basically just by layering a layer of compost on top. You're not right. We already did the chopping job. We just, successfully did that, right? Now we successfully adjusted our watering, and now I'm going to add more compost on top. So if you've ever noticed that your garden or your beds, they settle, right? They shrink, they reduce in size. You had it all the way up to the top, and now there's like a gap there. What is that? Why does that happen? Well, everybody used up all of the nutrients. Some of the compost got eaten, some of the organic material got eaten, right? Some of the sand, silt, and clays got, eroded away, right? So they used up some of that material to be able to create the stems, the leaves, the fruit, the veggies, the flowers, the seeds, all of that. So you have to replenish that. And that's why we talk about doing this 3 times a year, right? We have to add it back into the garden. This matters a lot, especially after heavy growing season. So if you're a heavy grower, right, and you're expecting a lot out of your garden, or it does produce for you quite a bit, then the more it uses, the more compost that you're going to have to put in there, because it wants to replenish that compost, right? Compost is not only structure for your soil and moisture retention, but it is also a food source for those microorganisms in the soil that turn it into nutrients that your plants can immediately use for growth, right? That's why it's so important. The way I kind of relate to this is compost is kind of like the food in the pantry or the food in a chef's kitchen, right? Like, we go to a restaurant to eat, right? The plants get planted and they need food to eat. Now, we have chefs in the kitchen that are going to cook our meal for us, right? And they're grabbing all of the food from the refrigerator and the pantry, and they're putting it all together, and they're cooking it up, and then they're going to bring it out to us so that we can eat it. And we're like, num, 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 delicious, so good, right? That's what we want. Well, our plants are the same way. They get planted and they're like, I'm hungry, I want food. And the chefs are the microorganisms in the soil. And they're like, pop, 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 pop. They're creating all of this food and this nutrients. And then they're like, here you go, Mr. Plant. You can have this, right? And the plant's like, num, 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 num. So good, right? But here's the thing. Those microorganisms need that organic material to create the food. That organic material is the compost that we are adding to the soil. If there's not enough of that, right, to go around, they can't create food for your plant, and your plant's not going to be able to survive. So hopefully that kind of shed some light on how or why we add compost into our garden beds. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is those chefs, right? Sometimes after we're coming out of the summer and our soils are just dry and busted, and some of us stop growing in the summertime. I know people that will pull out all of their plants, they will turn off the water, they will just let it dry out completely, right? And that is an option. It's not one that I would go to, because just like we were talking about shift work, right? Like, I don't want to start all over, and that's kind of starting all over, right? But if you do get those conditions, let's say you do till, let's say you do rip out all of your plants, one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're adding the biology back into the kitchen, right? It's kind of like somebody going into a restaurant and they're just going into the kitchen and throwing everything away. I'm going not away, but moving everything around. Pots and pans get moved around, right? The refrigerator gets moved to where the freezer is at, and then the pantry gets moved over to where whatever is at, and all of these things are missing. And then it's like, all right, well, I don't have any chefs in the kitchen. Nobody wants to work there, right? Because the conditions are not conducive. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like, the cutting boards are way too far away from the prep station, and the knives, why are they all next to, where the grill is at? Like, they should be next to the prep station. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And when everything's in disarray, no chefs want to work there, right? So we want to make sure that everything's set up so the chefs want to work there. These chefs are the microorganisms, which come from worm castings or extracts. We want to get them into place. If our soil is in disarray, if it is dry, dead, busted, right, and it's not doing well, we need to get those microbes back in there. And the way we do that is by adding worm castings, right? They are the chefs in the kitchen. Nothing is going to occur in your garden if you don't have any microorganisms. No nutrient cycling will occur, right? Yeah, I can go to the fanciest restaurant, but if there's no chefs in the kitchen, I'm not getting any food. It's not going to happen. There's nobody there to prep it and make it. So we got to have the biology in there. The biology comes from the worm castings and the worm casting extract, right? That's where it comes from. So it is extremely important that if our soils have dried out, if they are busted, or if we're just changing seasons, we want to make sure that we get a new round of chefs into the kitchen so that they can keep making food for us, right? The more chefs we have, the better the food is going to be. Everybody's gone to a restaurant where they were like, the food's delicious, and you were like, great, but you waited an hour for your food, and then the food was good, but you were like, I don't know if I would have waited an hour for this. I wish they would have had more chefs in the kitchen. Same thing with your soil. The more chefs that are in the kitchen, the more microbes that are there, the more nutrients that your plants have access to, right? The more chefs I have in the kitchen, the more people that can cook food for all of the patrons that come in and eating, right? Think about a buffet. You got to have a lot of chefs in the back making all that food for people coming and going, just eating all of it, right? So that's kind of why we need to get all of that biology back in there. And that biology comes from worm castings or an extract. Now, we want to make sure that we rebuild the soil correctly, and everything that we just talked about helps you do that, right? Adding the organic, adjusting the water, adding the organic material, breaking down the plants, right? Adding more microbes, like adding compost. All of these things help build the soil up year after year after year, or season after season after season, or month after month after month. It depends on how often you add these things, right? You're building that soil up, and it will get better and better and better. You can't do one without the other. This goes back to the kitchen. I can put all of the food into a restaurant that I want. I can add all of the compost to the soil that I want. But if there's no microorganisms, if there's no chefs in the kitchen to turn all of that food into something edible, right, to cook it and prep it for me to eat, it is useless. So you have to have all of these pieces in place if you want to have a successful garden. Compost is the food, the microbes are the chefs, and we as the patrons are the plants. We got to have those in place. And if you want to think about it, we all drink with, when you go to a restaurant, they usually give you water. So you got to have water. They're pumping air through the air conditioning, right? So you have oxygen there. And all of this goes to the 4 principles that we talk about in the Living Soil community, which is air, water, food, and microbes. If you get those into place and you keep those in place, then your garden will be happy and a thriving place. Now, let me tell you one way that we can create a long-term healthy ecosystem that keeps getting better year over year. So if you take all of those things that we talked about and you put them into play, that system will keep going. Ideally, if you keep the soil fed with compost and you keep the microorganisms there and you keep water there and the right amount of oxygen, you can pretty much grow any plant that you want. What I like to do, though, is make sure that those systems stay happy and healthy. So I add a couple of things to that system. One thing to ensure that I have all of the chefs in the kitchen is I add worms to my soil. Worms are microbe factories, and you have the ability to be able to turn, organic material into a bunch of different microorganisms that will create nutrients for your plants. So basically what I'm doing is if the soil and where the plant is a restaurant, right, then I have a school where I'm teaching chefs out back, right? And then I can just keep adding chefs to the kitchen and teach them exactly how to do the things that they need to do. And that's what worms are. They are these microbe factories that continually add microbes to the soil on a regular basis, right? You don't have to add any additional microorganisms. You don't have to add worm castings. You don't have to add an extract, right? You can if you want to, but the worms will take care of that for you. So that's one long-term solution that I have to help take care of your garden beds. The next long-term solution is that once you have all of these things in place, please put mulch on your beds. Mulch is the roof to your house, right? Without that, everything gets destroyed. So that is the last thing that I've kind of think about when I'm thinking about long terms on how to keep everything in my garden going, right? Again, I don't want to stop gardening or like mess everything up and then plant everything again, because I'm doing things over and over and over again, right? I want to make sure that I keep things in place and just build upon those so they get better and better. It goes back to, the shift work, right? When somebody comes in to replace you, you don't want to mess everything up for them. You want to have everything in place so they could just hop into the chair or hop into the desk or whatever that they're doing and continue doing where you left off, like seamless transition. And we should be doing the same thing for the soil. So that's kind of all of the things that I kind of talk about. I think I hit on everything here. Moving forward into the fall, I hope you guys take this into consideration. Chop and drop your material, adjust your watering, add some compost, add those microbes for a long-term care. Make sure you're adding worms and some mulch on top, and then you'll have a successful fall. And then just build on that the next season and the next season and the next season. That's all I really have for you guys this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see y'all next week.